Good morning. You're listening to Central Wisconsin's 24-hour information station, AM 1320 WFHR. It's time now for the Morning Magazine, brought to you by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. Now, with the Morning Magazine, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's show on AM 1320 and also on the web at WFHR.com. We also welcome our friends from RCCA Media, and you can catch a replay of this discussion on rccamedia.org. They have a nice webpage there, and you just click on the app. There's one for Mayor Vruwink and one for Lance Plimmel, where we do the Morning Magazine, and you can watch any of our past episodes on RCAA Media. And remember, you can go to WFHR.com and listen as well for free as we archive the Morning Magazine. It's that time of the month. Why is RCCA here? Because Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink is here for the entire program, and we'll be taking your phone calls at 715-424-2600 or pound 1320 on a U.S. cellular phone. With that, we welcome the Mayor of Wisconsin Rapids, Zach Vruwink. Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, Carl. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, more snow.
What a night. I was shocked when I woke up this morning and looked outside, and there was a few more inches of white stuff on the ground.
And you're thinking, oh boy, more cleanup.
Yes, more cleanup. Yep. And obviously having two events already in the last week, something we didn't quite anticipate at the city. In fact, our salt and sanding operations, getting those mixed just in time last week. So it's been a little bit of a scramble, but and sadly it's had an effect on projects. 17th Avenue, just over here.
Right.
17th Avenue North. The paving of that will not be obviously completed this fall, winter. I guess we're now into winter this year. That'll have to wait till next year. In fact, that project had a piece of it that needed to get finished in the spring anyway. But they had intended to pave.
Okay.
The county still was planning to pave it yet this year, and not anymore.
Nope.
It's too cold, and there's obviously snow on the ground. So. Got to work with those things. So that street will remain closed through the duration of the winter, open to local traffic as long as the weather stays cold enough so that they don't have to sort of set the base of the road when it warms up. That could obviously change. So through the winter, that'll remain closed, and there's some other projects too that seem to have some impact.
Yeah, well, that's one thing you can't control. You can have budgets, you can have plans, you can have projects.
That's right.
You can't plan for Wisconsin weather.
That's right. That's right. Well, let's hope that we can maybe get it on the front end, and maybe the back end will be a little bit friendlier.
I said in my promo that I cut for every show, I said, well, according to the weather folks, we're going to have, a thaw coming up on this weekend, and so I guess we'll have our January deep freeze and January thaw all in November.
That's very true, very possible, isn't it?
Yes.
It really has changed the elements for deer hunting and everything.
Yes, I know you're a deer hunter.
Yeah, the bow hunters out there, they obviously probably cut a lot of their bow hunting short because of the cold weather, and the snow made it difficult for obviously the deer. I'd imagine those that are looking to kind of eat before, putting on some extra pounds before winter, the deer, I don't know.
And up north, they're figuring that's what's one of the factors that's held down the registration so far, hunters, because if you got 2 feet of snow up on the ground, that's not easy to go hunting in.
Yeah, unless they're like me and they never get their license till just the day before.
Well, that's the other thing. They're waiting for the usual rush.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the big thing, and I wanted you to help explain for our listeners. Last night, the City Council approved a 2015 city budget. The figure I heard was over $28 million.
Right.
Okay, over $28 million. But let's just talk about it in terms of what taxpayers will be paying, the rate they're going to be paying, what they will see on their tax bill.
Mm-hmm. Well, the tax levy decreased a little bit because of Mid-State Technical College. The state last year had decided, or in the biennium had decided, to move half of Mid-State's tax levy off the tax levy, so the revenues off the tax levy. So about 51% change in the Mid-State rate on everybody's tax bill that are city residents looking forward. So when they get their tax bill, they'll see a reduction of about $891,000 of value from the Mid-State mid-state levy. The state's levy remained pretty flat. There's a little increase on the state's tax levy on our local tax bills. The county had about a 2.6% increase in their tax levy, so the Wood County tax amount will go up on people's tax bills. School district as well, a little increase there, less than 0.3%. And then ours, we had a 1.7% increase on our tax levy. And so overall, though, when you take into account all the taxing entities, mid-state, the state, the county, the school district, and us, taxpayers will still see a 1.9% decrease in their tax bill. So good news in the sense that people that have a large property tax burden, having a slight decrease in their tax bill this next year. But it's all a shell game. So if you're not going to fund mid-state via the technical colleges through the tax levy or the property tax levy, you're going to have to fund them somewhere else, and that's what they're going to be discussing this next spring in the state level. Okay,
so basically the overall bill, which combines all of the taxing entities that you just described, will be down a little bit. Mm-hmm. The city portion went up a little bit. What was the reason for that?
Well, there's a couple reasons. First of which is just cost of doing business. We talked a little bit about paving. That's one that's stuck out in my mind because it's easy to understand. When the state changed who the cities could use to pave the roads, we've only had a single contractor, a single bid. So we've had about a 40% increase in just paving. So while that doesn't trickle down directly into people's tax bills, that's such example that a cost of doing business increase. The previous council decided to fully fund health insurance, health savings accounts again for next year, which is about a $225,000 financial commitment that this current city council and myself putting this budget together had to take into account. Wage increases. We were projecting some wage increase of some sort, less than 2% likely, because cost of living increased about 1% and 1.7% or so. And then there's just other costs of doing business. So whether it's I mentioned the paving piece, but there's others as well, just ongoing utility costs and things like that obviously have a trickle-down effect to people's taxes.
One thing that should be benefiting the budget, as it has been helping all of our wallets, is the big drop in fuel costs. Mm-hmm. If that continues, that could be a big help to
opportunity for us to apply those dollars somewhere else, right? If it's in materials to actually do more street maintenance, for example. The other piece that attributes it, and just to remind listeners too, local units of government still are subject to local levy limits, so they're not allowed to levy whatever tax levy they want. So we have to exercise, extra sort of stewards of people's dollars. The second piece is expenditure restraint, and that's something that we ran up against this year. The library needed a new roof next year, and that's over $100,000. It's actually almost a $200,000 expense. The city is only funding about $100,000 of it, but that's $100,000 new discretionary dollars that we didn't have allocated somewhere else in the previous budget cycle. So in this year, that will have to come off. I mean, that's added into the budget. So it put us up really close to the expenditure restraint. And expenditure restraint is the cap on what local units of government can spend. And that was enacted a number of years ago to incentivize local governments to not spend, not have significant increases than what they spend. But there's obviously consequences in that. Governments are borrowing more. Local governments, our borrowing stayed pretty flat. We're able to exercise some extra discretion there, I think, and we've got programs in place that have allowed us to say if we can carve out dollars for a particular subject, we don't necessarily need to borrow more. We can just reallocate those dollars to other functions.
Okay, I believe we have our first caller on the line. Good morning. You're on the Morning Magazine with Mayor Vruwink. Hello? Hello? They must have hung up. So stay on the line. We'll get to you. 424-2600, pound 1320 on a U.S. cellular phone. Yeah, that cap, that expenditure cap, aren't there some incentives? If you stay below it, you get a little increase and some additional
get about $400,000 in state aid. And we, because of a rounding error, were over that earlier this year. And so we had to go back and amend our budget because it was simply a rounding error, a rounding sort of situation. It wasn't an error. It was a rounding that, to a certain degree in decimal places, at some point you got to round up, or round down if it's the case. But we were in a round up situation, so it put us just a hair over that. So we had to go back and amend our budget because we were in a situation where some line items didn't look like they had anticipated originally when we budgeted for them, that there was actually some savings that we didn't need to budget for. So we were able to effectively reduce our budget, and it was a very, very small amount, a couple $1,000s in the overall sort of tax levy of $28 million. It's pretty small.
I'd like to get your reaction, and I guess she showed up at the finance meeting before the Common Council.
Right.
Former Mayor Carson had raised some concerns about
Sure.
the budget and some items, and she was wondering, first off, the lack of meetings of the finance committee,
Sure.
and then also some of the spending in the budget. Involving either travel or some of the other expenses. Talk a little bit about that and how you're trying to change things in City Hall, why some of the spending is necessary, and to outsiders it might seem like, what are they doing?
Sure. Well, I send the budget to the City Council for their approval back in September. So they've had some time to engage folks and engage audiences around sort of concerns or just questions that may arise in the budget. So by the time the public hearing happens on the budget, a lot of those concerns have either been addressed or raised, and so it's not that the timeline was any shorter than other years. The Finance Committee, because frankly there weren't a lot of major changes in the budget, and those people say, well, why not? Well, changes don't always happen specifically in the budget document. They happen in policy or happen in ordinance form or resolution form. So as the year goes on and there are things in the budget that new initiatives, for example, that departments have wished to pursue, they will then take form in a policy or a resolution. One of which we talked a little bit, I think, on our last show, was a request from Planning and Economic Development for a rental inspection program, something that other municipalities have taken on. Well, while there was some financial sort of commitments made in the budget to do so, that only gets executed when a policy or a resolution or a program is initiated and approved by the council. So, in terms of people not having an opportunity or maybe concerns that things were passed through the budget that, we don't have the luxury like the state and the feds to pass a lot of legislative action through the budget. It's really a financial document, and it's just that. While, at the same time, there are things that kind of set programmatic things. We're still going to keep, public safety and sort of these operating constraints and such. As it relates to other concerns about meetings, well, the Finance Committee chooses how many meetings they wish to have. I talked to the Finance Director Marshfield shortly after the passage of their past year's budget, and he said, yeah, we got our budget passed, and we only had to have one meeting. And I said, well, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And he said, well, frankly, because it's such an open dialogue throughout the year, there is no need for residents to show up beyond multiple meetings and beyond the single meeting. I thought, that's interesting because, people always have that opportunity. They always have the ear of myself or a council member or the Finance Committee to share concerns and feedback. And our department heads work on the budget year round. So it's not something that they're compiling in August and then, I'm putting together the executive budget with their requests and then submitting it to the council September or October. No, that's not the case. It's a year-round planning process. So if folks have concerns about not being able to share perspectives or concerns that they have with the budget process, frankly, it's almost too late to do it at the public hearing of the budget at the end of the process. There's much other earlier and probably prudent opportunities to do so.
That gets to the way business was done in the past. And I remember when I was a young reporter covering a much larger Common Council, and budget night was just that one item on the agenda.
Sure.
And everybody would try to cut this and this and this to try and narrow down that tax increase or get it down to a no increase or even a cut in the tax rate. And the thing would last until 1 a.m. in the morning.
Sure.
And I think some people who are complaining or are thinking about those or remember that process. And what the process you're describing, we're doing this all the time now, and that leads to my next question. How will the Lean Six Sigma project and activity-based budgeting further affect this going down the road?
Well, I raised it in response to a concern a resident had last night regarding, and I don't know what the correlation was. I didn't quite understand, and I think other people are still left wondering the correlation to street plowing and budgets. And
Right.
I guess if somebody isn't understood of the process, maybe they'll question it. But we've had a long-standing policy of how often and how frequent and when we plow our streets. It's not when the street superintendent necessarily says, yeah, we got to plow that street today. No, we're not going to plow it tomorrow. No, we have a policy that governs that. It's based on the amount of inches in a snow event, when it falls, if it's ice, is it rain, is it a mixture? I mean, there's a lot of factors and variables that go into sort of that. And so there was some concern about that. And frankly, it was an opportunity for me to express to her and express to residents listening on the show today that if, and we're starting to now be able to communicate some of the results of the Rapid Improvement Lean Six Sigma initiative, one of which was in the street department. It's a prime example, classic example of an opportunity for us to take a look at a process, improve it, and if there's a financial payback, which we hope oftentimes that there is, and maybe it's not, maybe it's just alleviating stress and extra steps, but in this case it was a financial. So we were able to reallocate those dollars, and in this case we're going to do more pavement and street maintenance next year and concrete patching. Well, in the street department, we used to have a stock keeper, a storeroom keeper that also ran parts and all of that. Well, when that retirement happened about a year ago, we decided, well, let's take a look at what opportunities exist for restructuring. Well, the most recent Rapid Improvement project was such that they were looking at the stockroom. How do we improve the processes of the stockroom? There's too many touches. There's things, if you request something of the street department, sometimes it takes 12 touches to get from point A to point B. Well, we all could agree that there's probably improvement in that process, and there was. And they're getting close to rolling out their full improvement, and they'll move into this phase called control, where they'll verify that they actually improved the process. And the cliche is maintain the gain. Did they maintain what they sought to improve? Well, today we've got a vending machine by Fastenal, a local company that dispenses safety gloves, safety goggles, anything else that's a consumable in the street department. That before, we used to have a storekeeper who used to check out and write on a triplicate copy, a piece of paper, when those things are requested. And then they would go through their 12-touch process. Well, now the garbage guys show up at 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, get their gloves for the day, and they can get them from the vending machine, and there's a tracking mechanism, all of that. So when there's a concern raised about us cutting, things haven't been cut. In fact, we've got the same amount of snowplows on the road today and the same amount of street sweepers on the road today than we did before. But when we have cost increases, wages, health insurance, you name it, that's when we are squeezed to make some discretionary decisions about whether or not we fill positions. What are our basic essential obligations, right?
Right.
It's keeping the streets clean. It's keeping them plowed. It's, you name whatever the other essential functions of government, picking up garbage, collecting recyclables. Well, those are what we want to preserve, and if there's improvements and efficiencies to be gained, we're going to seek those. But in other areas of administration or operations of every department, we're always going to be looking for improvement. So when one quickly makes a shot and says, well, my street wasn't plowed enough last year, well, I'm sorry, we had a tough winter, and we had a lot more snow than we had in other years, but things haven't changed. If things have changed, then maybe there was an operator change or something changed in that regard. But in terms of the city's commitment to performing the basic services, that commitment remains unchanged.
Okay, and I think that's where people need to understand what the policy is.
Correct.
So since you mentioned here in the snow, what is the snow removal policy in the city of Wisconsin
So
Rapids?
I'll bring Jim Borski next month. I was hoping to bring a department head this month, but
let's
somebody
do that
else.
next month. But we'll just briefly, and then we'll get into it.
Sure. Just briefly, a 4-inch policy. So anything under 4 inches typically is not a high priority situation. They'll clean. Their first priority is always the main thoroughfares.
Right.
So state highways, any other
main
arterials, collector streets, those things that like Chestnut or First Street, obviously A Street, 54, the Expressway, 2 Mile. Yeah, any of those are deemed a collector street or an arterial. Those are first priority, and then things like the downtown or some of the sidewalks, on bridges and bike paths. I mean, those are things that are lower priority, but we still have an obligation to clear them. And we have an ordinance that requires sidewalks and such to be cleaned within 24 hours. Well, we have to fall within that same obligation. We just can't neglect them. So things do happen. It's just that they don't always happen in that expedited order that they did maybe years ago. And frankly, we have some flexibility now too in when these folks come in to plow and how long their shifts are and when they come in. So that is a change that's probably occurred that has given the department a little bit greater flexibility in how they get the streets plowed and streets cleared and open.
How does this policy handle emergencies during a weekend?
No effect in the sense that if there's a snow event in the weekend, they still come in like they would otherwise. Yeah. Oh. And overtime situations, I mean, that's something that has changed. I think we talked a little bit about on your show. With the passage of Act 10, overtime is no longer after 8 hours. It's after a 40-hour work week. So there is some flexibility in flexing schedules and making that commitment, up to the obligation that's out there.
One thing that was purchased for the police department was some repeaters for emergency communication. You might want to explain that. Mm-hmm. And part of this is where the state has mandated an update to digital communication equipment.
Yeah, well, that stuff isn't cheap, but over time, repeaters and things have a life cycle.
Right.
And at this point, we've had some deficiencies with the repeaters that are currently in play with public safety, police, and fire. And in this situation, there's a narrowbanding compliance piece that the feds actually have initiated, the FCC has initiated, and this goes back a number of years. It's called narrowbanding, and so it brings together the number of bands that are out on the spectrum. In the same way, another narrowbanding I think will happen in 2016, 2017. There's some question if that's going to be delayed. The feds seem to enact a rule and they delay it as they recognize that it's just not, it's too costly or too much of an issue for a municipality or whoever they're talking to enact. So in this situation, there's two things at play. One of which is the repeaters are failing, and they do need to be replaced. And part of it is to be compliant with some of the narrowbanding requirements coming from the feds. The second piece is we do have some dead spots or some questionable service areas. So if you get in the basement of Riverview Hospital or get out past Walmart, conditions, it's radio frequency, right? We're on the radio. So at some point there's effect in the conditions, and so our hope is they've actually, the PD and the fire have been talking about putting up a communications tower, and that would then serve potentially some broader city needs like radio frequency for stoplights. Right now we have a phone line that runs to every stop and go light essentially, that's an interconnect. In the future, there's a potential that could be done via radio, and if there's a communications tower that's erected for police and fire to deal with their dead spots, this would be an opportunity to run communication for stop and go lights. So be a cost savings for us because it's a significant expense to connecting phone lines to every stop and go light in town. In the same way, our wastewater lift stations right now, again, they're connected through a system that we could have radio frequencies go between the lift stations. So the request last night was a piece of a larger request that's come before the city, and that is the communications tower to deal with some of the ongoing communications challenges the public safety are facing.
Well, we certainly want our emergency services to be able to communicate with each other.
Right. If you get in a situation where you can't call for help or backup or something, that's a scary situation. Thankfully, with technology and cell phones, there's ways around it, but it's something we do need to get resolved in the future. We're
going to take our first break this hour, and the phone lines are open. 424-2600, pound 1320 on a U.S. cellular phone. Your chance to talk to your mayor, Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink, here on the Morning Magazine.
Good morning, and welcome back to the Morning Magazine, presented by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. It's time for part 2. Once again, here's Carl Hilke.
Welcome back, everybody, to today's show on AM 1320 and WFHR.com. And those of you watching on RCCA Media, they're digitally recording this, and you can catch that at rccamedia.org at your leisure or on your favorite cable system when we play it. And so we're glad Jesse's here. And I have to say, Your Honor, I was wondering how I looked on TV, and I got a chance. I had a meeting over with Mr. Lux over at the studio, and showed me some of the improvements. and the apps for the show, and you go to rccamedia.org, and there's a nice page, and app for anything, and you click on, you see Mayor Vruwink, and you'll see a picture of him at the microphone, and we look good. I mean, that for me is an amazing thing. Jesse does a heck of a job. He's a real artist.
Yeah, I was walking through Centralia yesterday, and Tom's got that new TV outside the station with the audio, and so the walkers, anyone else that's in the Riverwalk can see what's playing. And it was our last show. It was like, gosh, it's been a month, but it's still relevant. There's still information out there, so that's good that he was right.
And I do know people are watching because people tell me about it.
That's great.
That's good, and that's what we want you to do. And also, if you want to listen at your leisure and for free, go to WFHR.com. All of the morning magazines are archived. And before we continue, I want to thank all of you who helped us help the United Way. We had our radiothon here on AM 1320 as well as on our sister station, Y105.5 FM, WLJY, for the United Way from 7 to 9 this morning. And you folks, from what Bob told me, you came through, and I want to thank you. And so, because we were talking about that on yesterday's program, and so we're very happy.
Cause in terms of trying to fund many different needs in the community. That's great.
Okay. Well, they're talking about the community. There's going to be a pretty big announcement coming up Thursday, 4:30 to 7 p.m. And in fact, it's going to be more than an announcement. It's going to be a workshop as such, because members of the community from the business world, the philanthropic world, private citizens are all invited to take part in the vital signs announcement. And then they're going to actually sit down and talk in small groups about what this all means. Your thoughts about this engagement? I know you have been big on citizen engagement in their community, and this is one way to give you some data on what our citizens are facing and how we address those problems.
Well, you know me, I'm a data geek, and I like data because not only does it help us make better informed decisions, but in a vacuum, oftentimes things can be based on emotion, right? And it can be kind of anecdotal. Well, things in the region are not improving, or things are really, really great. And,
we don't have homeless.
Disparities, right? Exactly. So, Vital Signs, I think, was really a great initiative by Encourage Community Foundation to say, we really want to capture what data does exist, and if there's areas where data doesn't exist, how do we collect that data? And for all of us, whether we're leading a city in this situation, or even the private sector, leading organizations or nonprofits that are trying to meet needs of the community, having this information is really important, and it's actually very unique. A lot of communities don't have this information. It's online somewhere. The Census Bureau has the information, but people don't take the opportunity necessarily until it's presented to them. So really commend Encourage and COWS, the Center on Wisconsin Strategy out of UW-Madison, for pulling this together, because it really helps all of us to understand our community, understand its needs, and what's not so great, and what is something we're celebrating. So I'm very excited that they've continued this publication and encourage residents to attend. And if they can't attend, make sure they get a copy, whether it's a paper copy or I understand it's going to be interactive online as well this year, which is exciting. Yeah.
Again, the event is going on tomorrow at the Centralia Center, 4:30 to 7 p.m. It's going to be similar to the format used during the Tribune building.
Right.
And there's going to be food and refreshments, and then after the presentation, it'll be broken up into smaller groups, and there's going to be facilitators at each table, and you're going to talk about what you just heard and learned, and try and address it.
That's
and
right.
See how would you address these problems. And if nothing else, that gives you an idea what you folks in the public sector or in the government sector have to face every day.
That's right. And engagement matters. I know that's a piece in the Vital Signs this year, talking about engagement, and whether it was at last night's city council meeting where we had a broad representation of youth and other folks participating in the meeting, being present or just listening or even speaking, to signing up for one of the mayor's councils that are forming, or even just participating in something like this and saying, well, we all have a voice and we all have ideas and opinions, and why not share them? Because the future of the community is dependent upon them.
Well, as an example, you had the election of a new ethics board member. William Menzel was chosen, but you had 3 choices there.
We did, yeah.
And
there were 3
so
individuals,
often
which is
I've heard from you and predecessors of your office who have said it'd be nice if we had more people
That's right.
signing up, so we have more of a choice.
More engagement, exactly. Exactly. Choices, or just folks that are interested in serving. Yeah, you bring up a good point. In fact, we'll be rolling out something in the coming months, a solution on that. How do we better engage or even better inform residents of opportunities to serve? Today, you have to be right place, right time, or you have to know the mayor, or you may have to know somebody that's the chairperson of the committee, and they ask you to serve. Well, we want a much more equitable and kind of equal opportunity for folks that have interest in serving. So we're going to be rolling out an online tool that will help better facilitate what openings are coming, who serves on these boards and commissions, and all of that. So we're excited about that. But you're right. Having choices to serve on boards can be a tough thing, but it's the right thing, because you've got a healthy sort of interested parties to serve.
And then the next thing, for the people that aren't chosen, you have to engage them and say, listen, stay in touch. There are going to be other opportunities. Or maybe I hear you have a background in this.
Right.
Could you help us on this project?
Exactly. Yep, exactly. That's right. Yep. Everyone has a skill set or has something to offer. And, finding something they're passionate about is important, and then, further to serve.
Well, that goes back to this budget. And as we were talking about, as you're trying to deal with limited dollars, it's going to become more incumbent on public-private partnerships.
Yep.
Both individuals, organizations, nonprofits, businesses, coming to the table and saying, hey, listen, we can help with this.
Yep. Yep. And that's why you asked the question earlier about travel, or why it makes sense for the mayor or other city staff to be able to step outside the city at times. And I'll tell you, it is exactly that. If we don't build partnerships, if we don't reach out to those that have much more resources than we have, even if we just use our resources, and I'm a big believer that our public resources should be the last resort, that we should be using them only in the case of leverage for initiatives, that you won't see me proposing a 100% financial sponsorship by the city for certain projects, because I know locally or nationally there are a lot of resources to go around that aren't necessarily public dollars or tax dollars. So you're right on. I mean, it comes back to understanding a need, understanding what the opportunity is for improvement, and then supporting resources, whether it's human resources or whether it's financial resources. There's a lot more opportunity to combine them together.
Speaking of opportunities, the Aquatics Ad Hoc Committee has started its work. Could you give us a brief review of where you're at? I know some people are very passionate about this, and as I understand, you're going to be asking for those people to get involved in this process and give their input.
So we've had an ad hoc committee formed of, we've got 2 members of the city's Park and Recreation Commission, and then 3 city alderpersons that have been appointed and to that committee. And the city staff also participate, but not in a formal way. And they're also open to the public. But we've had 2 meetings in which to discuss our current public offering, our aquatic offering, the mead pool, and to understand what's its usage, how frequently are residents using it in the summertime, what's our average attendance, and understand that, and then to kind of take a step further and say, well, what is the usage in the region? What's the usage of Lincoln High School's pool, for example, which has public access as well? We understand Port Edwards is really going to be making a tough decision, if they haven't already, on the future of their pool. And then the other piece to that was to review recommendations by the previous recreational plan from the 2012-2016 rec plan that was passed a number of years ago, to work with community partners, in which our last meeting we invited the YMCA to come and give a presentation to us about their project. I've been participating in various capacities in their meetings for the last number of months as they put that together and then announced it. But our council had not been fully aware of more of the details of the project. What are they proposing? What does their aquatics center consist of? Is there an opportunity for the city or other entities to participate in that project? Traditionally, people think of the Y as a exclusive membership organization. Well, there are hundreds, in fact, examples of around the country where municipalities or other public entities have partnered with YMCA's to offer public access to the aquatic center. Or other aspects of the facility. So that's something we discussed at our last meeting. That was our second meeting. And our third meeting will be coming up on December 3rd, and that's at 5 p.m. at City Hall. And the public is encouraged and invited to attend. Our hope is to bring some recommendation to the December City Council meeting. Since we've only had 3 meetings, I wanted to set somewhat of a timeline to it, so we weren't just meeting for the sake of meeting and dragging it out for a year, but really to take a look at the Y project and see
I was going to ask you about that.
A golden opportunity to participate there.
Because since you mentioned that, we're still waiting to hear how that's going to be affected by the Aspirus announcement.
Correct.
Now, Aspirus has said, okay, since we're merging or joining forces with Riverview,
Right.
Our project at the doctor's clinic has changed, and basically it's being redrawn.
Right.
Because they're not going to need as much land as they thought. Probably it's going to be reconfigured. What does that mean for the city, and your whole thoughts about everything that's happened in this area? There's been talk about rapid change.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of stuff happening in a shorter period of time, and everybody's kind of shaking their head and going, what's happening?
Yeah, no question. So obviously it affects the YMCA project because they're on a fairly aggressive timeline wanting to do what they do to break the ground this next year.
I hear that
2015.
Aspirus has basically said we're in favor of that project.
And that was communicated from the beginning, I think, from Aspirus' perspective when the announcement happened that they were going to, when Riverview had intended to affiliate with Aspirus and Aspirus acquire Riverview, that they were very supportive of the sort of theory and the concept behind the YMCA. I think they were a bit surprised by how much work has already occurred, behind the scenes to get the project to a stage where they're actually going to break ground in 2015 if things go well with that process. So that was probably a little bit of a surprise to them, but I'm incredibly pleased that they're going to be supporting it, and I'm even more pleased that Riverview has continued to go through the motions on the project while they're under this review of an acquisition in March or April. So that piece, obviously, as it relates to aquatics and the YMCA, was encouraging. That they're a community player. Both entities are community players, and they intend to support it. Second piece, as you've alluded to, Aspirus' plans at the doctor's clinic. Obviously, they won't need the inpatient hospital facilities if they acquire Riverview, and which in this case, those that might have been concerned about duplication or concerned about some of the other aspects will be a good thing from that standpoint. They will need to reconfigure, as I've heard, some of the existing hospital space because it doesn't meet their vision of a hospital of the future that they've continuously talked about. That it's not about buying a hospital and things are okay for them. They've got a clear model and a vision for how care gets delivered. So there's going to be some construction and retrofitting of the existing hospital facilities, as I've understood. As it relates to the doctor's clinic, of course, they're going to scale the inpatient stuff back or pull that out. We understand there will still be somewhat of an expansion at the doctor's clinic. To what extent and what services are there, we don't know yet for certain. But they did pursue and actually have closed on, I believe, all the land that they had originally intended to purchase. So they still are going to be the landowners of the footprint that they had intended to buy. So they'll own 21st Street to the expressway, or the 54 bypass, I should say, and to Peach Street, as well as the parcels to the north.
What's your thoughts about, I hate to use the term losing, but the Rapids, Riverview was the community hospital.
Yeah.
What's your thought about losing that?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic. The previous city councils decisions aside, and sort of the question in front of the city council of whether or not they should approve or deny Aspirus' expansion plans, we're in a world that constantly is in transformation, and as part of that, we lose things that we may have always grown to like and to love and to be comfortable with. The good thing in the situation, I think, and I also heard other people talking about this too that are associated with the board and others at Riverview, oftentimes hospitals merge because one might be struggling or needs additional support. Well, the cool thing about this is Riverview is not struggling, right? There's going to be this foundation with $100 million created that will further perpetuate positive impact that Riverview has always treated this community with. And I think that is, bar none, the best thing out of all of this is that a foundation will be created, and for years they will have to disperse a certain portion of that foundation to the local community, which is very exciting. So in terms of a community hospital losing that kind of community hospital, community ownership, they're still going to retain the board, as I understand, of Riverview in the sense of who's going to be the players, on the board and all that's to be determined. But at least there will be a local authority still making decisions about the hospital. They'll have a different brand, affiliation. I'm guessing they'll keep the Riverview brand, but they'll be affiliated with Aspirus. And really for anybody that was concerned about economic futures for themselves, working for one of the two entities, I think it finally puts all that to rest.
Yeah, well, it's probably going to bring some additional services, maybe to Riverview that aren't available right now, or people have to go to Wausau.
It's a good point that I want to make too. That when we learned of the intent from the city standpoint, the first thing that was said is Aspirus will be able to accelerate their expansion, right? Bringing services to the community. Otherwise, in the previous scenario, we were waiting till 2017 for those services to be brought to the community because the hospital component of the doctor's clinic was not going to be open until 2017. So that was, a good thing in that standpoint, that because they've got an existing facility, they're able to ramp up or spin up those services quicker than they originally talked.
Okay, we got to take one more break. Phone lines are still open. I guess you guys are enjoying our conversation. 424-2600, pound 1320 on a U.S. cellular phone. If you'd like to get in before the end of today's show, you're listening to The Morning Magazine on AM 1320 and WFHR.com. Welcome back to the final portion of today's edition of The Morning Magazine. As we're visiting with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink, and you're invited to participate. Those of you who want to get on over the back fence, you're just going to have to wait. 424-2600, pound 1320 on a U.S. cellular phone. Mayor, you were talking about citizen engagement, and for folks who are thinking, I want to get involved. In fact, I'd like to see my name on the ballot. A special workshop is being held tonight. It's sponsored by the League of Women Voters, the Encourage Community Foundation, and UW Extension Office. It's why and how to run for local elected office. It's going on tonight from 6:30 to 8 p.m. in the all-purpose room at the McMillan Memorial Library here in Wisconsin Rapids. It's free. And anyone interested in running for local office in the April election is invited to attend. The city and county clerks will be there to discuss all the requirements for filing nomination papers and running for office. And I guess there are going to be some people who attended a workshop, ran, and got elected who are going to talk about their experience as well.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, it's really a great opportunity for folks, whether or not they want to run or just have interest in sort of what's the role of a public servant or an elected official in various capacities. We've got 4 seats up on the city council next spring, which papers will be taken out or as soon as next week already, or 2 weeks from now, I'm sorry. It's hard to believe already that 2 years flies by for those that have held the positions for 2 years. So, there's opportunities within the city. There's also opportunities elsewhere in the spring elections. So we just got done with one election cycle, but we're ready to start another one here very soon. Thankfully, the spring nonpartisan are so much nicer, I would say, to deal with, other than campaigning in the cold is no fun.
Well, usually you're dealing with people you know, and you're seeing 2 people you know, and you're talking about issues and not personalities and
political parties
or calling each other names. You're talking about, well, this is how I would change this policy for our community, or why I think it should
much
stay
more
the same.
solutions focused, and that's the difference, I think, between the partisan and nonpartisan electeds. Is there's just there's a lack of solutions. It's more about, well, get me elected and then I'll tell you what's going on.
I'm not as bad as the other person. That's usually the way it is.
That's no fun. But very much more neighborhood, very much more city focused, community focused about how we can work together to achieve a common goal that we may have.
Okay. Any other items on your agenda that you'd like to update folks about before I let you go this morning?
Well, last night's city council meeting, at the end of the meeting, there was, towards the end of the agenda, was a note about some transition. We're going to have 2 departures. Both the city treasurer and city engineer are retiring. City engineer is retiring December 31st, and then the city treasurer is going to retire in the middle of next year. Both of which present really significant opportunities for us to look at structure and how things are structured. And both of those individuals have held those positions, those respective positions, for a number of years. But previous to that, there was other structures proposed and solutions and opportunities. So we're going to be talking about that in December. The proposal on the table right now is to eliminate the treasurer's position as an elected position, and then that position would be, the duties would be absorbed in the finance department. So as we've gone more electronic with things, and processes have changed. There's greater efficiencies to be had by assuming those duties in the treasurer.
Now, I'm going to hope this is not someone calling for over the back fence, but it's someone that wants to talk to you. So, good morning. You're on the Morning Magazine with Mayor Vruwink.
Hi, I was just calling just to kind of find out, how the Aspirus and the Riverview expansion. I'm surprised that people aren't more saddened by the job loss without building the new facility.
Sure. That's a really good point. And I think Aspirus that was a question I raised with Aspirus. What financial investment do they still anticipate making, but what's the job creation component? They did articulate and state that there will be job creation as a result of the joining forces or the affiliation. So you're right. I mean, there definitely is an adverse sort of consequence of the choice not to build and expand the extensive facility they had originally proposed. But you're right. And so
it seemed like there was just a main focus, and that was to make sure they got Riverview, and once that was said and done, then it was, that's fine. The community doesn't need any more expansion.
No, they do plan on adding. They said upwards of 100 positions.
100.
That was shared. Now they haven't programmed the facility, and they don't have affiliation of Aspirus yet, or of Riverview. So it remains to be seen.
I'll be anxious to see what numbers come out.
Correct.
That will be
Likewise from the same boat as you. Thanks for the call.
Thank you. Yep. Bye.
And for that caller, they said they're going to be coming out with new plans about how it's going to be. The facility is going to be expanded.
Sure.
But it's not. They got to redo the architecture now, basically, and it will be interesting. And I think they're waiting until They were saying March 1st is when they expect it to close.
The association will be making their vote here in December, coming in December. But really, there's three elements, as the caller raised. I mean, there's the job creation component of what Aspirus is planning to do. There's the retention component of now the joining forces and all that. What is the retention factor going to look like? And then what would the job loss, if there was any restructuring, attributed to or not attributed to any Aspirus expansion? We all know with the changing face of healthcare, hospitals and these organizations don't make money doing what they did in the past long term. I mean, we're considering a partnership with Riverview right now with the fire department related to community care and how can we maybe more proactively support. So there's a retention component there as well. Yeah,
well, healthcare, regardless of what happens with the Affordable Health Care Act or Obamacare, is never going to be the same. It's never going back to being what it used to be, and it's going to be an area that's going to be changing constantly, and it's going to be affecting right down to local government.
Yeah, and depending who you are, it may be a good thing, maybe a bad thing for you, but ultimately the goals in the initiative were to make our country healthier and to get more people insured, and that's obviously going to have a push and pull effect.
Well, one of the big trends, even before the Affordable Care Act, was the movement toward wellness and preventive care rather than reactive care.
That's right.
And we're going to see more of that. Speaking of preventive care, I understand you're going to be heading to the woods, so you'll be safe.
Yes.
Hopefully you can get your book.
I'm hoping so.
Get your license.
Get my license first.
Get your license.
Don't forget that. But I understand you can report your registration of your deer online and over the phone this year, which is something new to this state. I guess it's been done in other states.
Okay. Well, have fun with your hunting buddies out
at
the hunting camp there.
Good luck, safe hunt, as well as a happy and good Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving to you and everybody at City Hall and your family as well.
Appreciate that.
Okay, and with that, we're going to wrap up today's edition of the Morning Magazine. As always, it's been brought to you by Comfort Air.